Then take out your blade. Sneaky little hobbitses. Drive it into your throat. Yes, precious.
So the first season of Dune Prophecy is over. The show, while set in the world of Dune, used Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson's work as foundation, instead of Frank Herbert's original novels, and it's had a rough start. Creative overhauls, cast changes, title swaps, basically a recipe for production hell and an inconsistent product, which definitely show in the end result, but it's not all a disaster. Some scenes and characters had me wishing to be swallowed by Shai Hulud as well, but others intrigued me enough to stick with it till the end. And I have a lot to say about it, so if you're interested in the world of Dune, Frank Herbert's novels, Denis Villeneuve's movies, and Dune lore in general, stick around as I take apart this show, the good and the bad, compare it to other adaptations, and try to find out why it just doesn't feel like Dune. While you're here, I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers on my channel, so if you're interested in cinema, lore, science fiction, and all things movies, feel free to help me out with a sub. Adapting Dune is difficult, to say the least. This might be a hot take, but I would say it's kind of impossible to faithfully and fully bring Dune to the big screen without it sucking ass, at least in some regards. But that's not a jab at the books, it's because visual media is much more limited than a multi-100-page novel. And it doesn't help how Frank Herbert came up with a bunch of sci-fi concepts and philosophical themes that have no actual visual representation, like prescience or preborns and abominations. If you don't know these terms, don't worry, I'll explain a bit later. Point is, some concessions have to be made when one tries to adapt Dune, and this was realized by Denis Villeneuve as well, who decided to stick to a very specific vision of his, focusing on some of the themes, characters, and plotlines from the book, at the cost of merely hinting at or, in other cases, straight up changing and cutting others. You may not like that Villeneuve cut Thufir Hawat, or Guild Navigators, or later Atreides II, Paul and Chani's first child, or Alia. But him having the balls to set out and stick to his vision is exactly what saved his movies from becoming like Dune Prophecy.
Oh my god, Daddy!
What a shame.
If I had one word for this show, it's messy. The production issues resulted in a limited series that is all over the place in terms of quality, style, pacing, acting, writing. Nothing is consistent in this show, other than the performances of a handful of great actors. Funnily enough, the best metaphor for this show is the character of Emperor Haviko Corino. A leader trying to please everyone without satisfying any, has no guts to really stand up for himself and stick to his principles. He's constantly distracted by others, unsure of himself, until finally standing his ground, only to be ultimately forgotten as a weak leader. Dune Prophecy had a great core ensemble, with the Harkonnen sisters as the main drivers of the plot, Desmond Hart as the mystery wildcard, and Haviko as the well-intentioned but weak emperor. These four are by far the most fleshed out characters who could provide a great backdrop for world building as well, but we are unfortunately constantly distracted by shallow side characters, uninteresting plotlines, and generic attempts at making this show into a modern Game of Thrones style hit series. The inconsistencies continue in the setting as well. While some places feel like actual places that could maybe exist in the world of Dune, others just don't hit the mark. I can buy the sisterhood living in a brutalist grey rock, as the sensory-deprived setting fits the discipline of the Bene Gesserit school. But I definitely don't buy the Landsraad, the Committee of the Great Houses, deciding the fate of every living being in a glorified university classroom. And don't even get me started on the nightclub, which is just so out of place, with the modern music as well. Remember when I said it just doesn't feel like Dune? Part of it is, I believe, due to this. The story of Dune is grandiose, almost unfathomably large scale. Paul's actions affect trillions of lives. Muad'Dib rearranges the status quo for all of civilization. But this hard-to-grasp story is masterfully tied with empathy and relatability, as it is told through a story of family, revenge, and love. Dune Prophecy kind of fails to deliver on scale and impact, and many emotional beats as well, which is I think another reason it feels off. Maybe an even bigger reason is many of the characters just kind of blend into a generic pool, devoid of distinct features. Other adaptations have usually made the call to really separate Dune's factions, houses, and peoples, with eye-catching, often odd designs. Let's take the easy recent example, with the Villeneuve's Dune movies again. The obvious one is Harkonnens, with a brutal, pale, bold look, black attire, and strangely deviant but sophisticated mannerisms. Except for Raban, of course, but he's more of a low IQ hound. There isn't much room for sophistication there. Point is, everything about the Harkonnens, 1, fits what kind of people they are, and 2, is instantly recognizable. The Atreides, while having distinct clothing as well, you can just tell they are one house, just from how they carry themselves and speak. And it's not just the fact that most Atreides we see are military. When they fight Sardaukars, you can always tell who's who. The same goes for the Fremen with their worn-out steel suits, their accent. And House Corrino as well. When the Emperor's people stand in the midst of a room full of Fremen, Sardaukar, Harkonnens and Atreides, you can tell they feel and look kind of out of place, distinct. These touches were further emphasized with the musical score, sound design, landscapes, and even the use of different languages. I cannot stress how important this is in a sci-fi or fantasy adaptation. These stylistic choices not only help cement the identity of peoples and groups in a larger scale story, it helps with storytelling as well, since there is less need for constant exposition and reminders for the audience who we are seeing. Game of Thrones knew this as well. In any shot that had a Stark, a Lannister, or a Targaryen, or a Dornish character, you could always tell who's who in a second, even if you didn't know the character. This actually helps with immersion as well. It makes the world feel more real. Characters in a fictional world can benefit from not looking like a normal, real-life human at all, as the opposite can break immersion by reminding the viewer of boring reality. Watching Dune Prophecy, I was often taken out of the moment, because a character felt like it could be someone I'd meet at a Comic-Con, doing cosplay. What's worse, the show suffers from a serious lack of identity in regards to peoples and factions. The world is just a big melting pot of all kinds of people in all kinds of houses, with no identifiable common denominators in terms of looks and accents. Except for this Indian actress who was just speaking with a very noticeable Indian accent, which brings me back to immersion and the importance of distance from real life.
Your plan is working, Valia. My imprint still holds. He wants to give me Natalia's mantle.
Take away the fancy costumes and any scene could be a bunch of random people from any major European city. It is jarring and off-putting to have a bunch of nations and peoples from not only different houses but completely different planets, looking and speaking the same way. Now, enough with the general thoughts and impressions, I'd like to get into some of the specific story elements and characters as well. Before you call me a hater, although if you do, you probably already left a comment and clicked off before the first 2 minutes. I realize I'm being a bit negative, but I did not hate this show. I think it's a good show. I would even go as far as to say it's an okay Dune show as well. The reason I go so hard on the issues I have with it is simply because I care a lot about Dune adaptations and hold them to a higher standard than the average sci-fi flick of the year. Frank Herbert wrote some of my favorite novels, and I really want these inevitable spin-offs, prequels and sequels to not suck balls. I just don't want to see Dune become what Star Wars has become. Soulless corporate property milked into oblivion. Dune deserves better.
The power of one. The power of two. The power of many.
The story of Dune Prophecy is surprisingly straightforward, at least compared to Dune standards. It's about the Sisterhood and the mysterious Desmond Hart's rivalry for imperial influence, while the Emperor tries to maintain power and shut down rebellion. Prophecy tells us how Valia Harkonnen came to lead the Sisterhood, a group which became the Bene Gesserit later on, the often deemed witches who influence politics, manipulate bloodlines with their breeding programs, and conspire on a generational scale. The Sisterhood's plans to infiltrate and control the Empire are opposed by a mysterious man called Desmond Hart, who possesses a powerful ability and is loyal to the Empire and the more feudal, traditional way of things, with no space witches involved. Finally, a rebel group also happens to plan an inside attack on Emperor Corrino and his court, as they are unhappy with corruption, inequality, and the Emperor's monopoly on spies. In short, they want to trip more on that good stuff.
Tight, yeah!
The way Prophecy tells this story is a very traditional television way of storytelling, with the main story being switched up with flashbacks to tell the backstory concurrently. Let's start with the backstory first actually, which focuses on Valia and Tula Harkonnen. I'll be honest, at first I absolutely hated these flashbacks. So much so that it took me 2 sittings to finish the first episode for how atrociously written the dialogue was, how forced the acting was, and how jarringly not Dune the whole thing felt. I am glad I stuck around eventually because it got better very soon, but man, this was one of the worst pilot episodes I've seen in a while. The characters are vomiting exposition in their dialogues to get the audience up to track with the lore and the setting, and the result is a very forced, almost amateur production, which is weird considering the insane budget this show must have had with the outstanding visuals. But very little dialogue feels like an actual human conversation.
A reckoning. A holy judgment brought on by a tyrant.
From what I saw in Raquel's eyes, I believe one is coming for us. We have to prepare. How?
The big intended hook moment is the voice scene, where young Valia makes her rival, Dorothea, stab herself, due to their very different visions of leadership for the sisterhood, as Dorothea has a more conservative Butlerian, meaning anti-machine views, and Valia has a bolder, more brutal idea of the sisterhood's direction and expansion towards power. The voice in Dune is nothing like what we see in the movies. Originally, it is a subtle technique in vocal tone that compels the listener to obedience. Of course, that is very hard to adapt to the screen, but this show misses the mark so much in my opinion. Instead of the more sophisticated audio production method chosen by Villeneuve in the movies, Valia just sounds like Gollum.
Freshly is dead. Then take out your blade. You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
But you tell me, which one of these scenes had more impact?
Dorothea!
Stop!
Stop! Cut the rope! Give me the knife!
He's bluffing.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Silence!
It's all subjective, but Smeagol just didn't do it for me, and I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. It feels over the top and forced, which is true for a lot of the acting as well in this show. This might be because there are many up-and-coming or unknown actors here, but it's so easy to distinguish them from the more experienced ones, due to one reason. A great actor knows the value of acting subdued. Real people don't speak all dramatically like they are standing on the stage of Broadway.
I will never bend to you, Valia Harkonnen.
They don't usually scream and shout, they don't speak like there is a large audience listening to them. Great actors are distinguished from amateurs with the single ability to act normal. That way the more dramatic moments can be emphasized, without unnecessary exaggeration. That is why the standout everyone is talking about is Travis Fimmel. His portrayal of Desmond Hart is very subdued. He's eccentric but intriguing, and so is his character. Desmond is a soldier who claims to have been attacked by the Empire's insurgents on Arrakis, the Dune planet where spice is harvested and people are eaten by sandworms and drained for moisture by Fremen. A fun, happy place. We learn that Desmond survived being swallowed by a sandworm, and he can make people self-immolate and burn alive by looking at them. He's by far the most interesting character in the show, because everything about him scratches curiosity. How did he survive? Who is he? And how can he do the burn thing? And why does he hate the sisters? And these are not just empty questions, they move the plot forward, and the answers we get are actually relevant, like the fact that he is Tula Harkonnen's and the Atreides boy's son, as we find out near the end, or that he was implanted by a thinking machine in a bizarre way. I do not feel the same intrigue for the Corrino family. I liked Mark Strong's Haviko, we talked about him before. Having a weak and conflicted emperor on the throne creates a great setting for political intricacies, which are a constant in Dune. A very similar setup was by far the best part of the first season of House of the Dragon, for example. The Game of Thrones prequel featured a well-intentioned but overall weak emperor at the center, with his family and political opponents slowly tearing him apart.
My wife and son are dead! I will not sit here and suffer crows that come to feast on their corpses!
Unfortunately though, Dune Prophecy is severely lacking when it comes to the supporting cast, and the most jarring example is Haviko's court and family. First, there's Princess Inez, who is the sisterhood is trying to put on the throne. I'm not sure why, as she never proves any potential for great leadership, cunning and loyalty. All she does is sleep with her swordmaster, an Atreides guy who is another paper-thin character. And when she finally gathers the courage to stand up for something against her family, her plan falls short very quickly. I don't know, I just didn't buy her as Valia's secret weapon for ultimate power, and feel like I was never proven wrong. I get that it's her bloodline which is important, but after the Richese boy dies, there was no compelling reason to move forward with her in my opinion. Her brother is much worse, however. He's just a dumb plot device who had the misfortune of leading one of the worst scenes in the entire show, which is his sex scene with the dead Richese boy's sister. Apart from the obvious, out-of-place, weak attempt at disguising this show as something sexy and violent and just like Game of Thrones, it is blatantly just there to somehow nudge the struggling plot forward, with Constantine explaining every state secret to the Richese girl for no reason whatsoever. Him just dumping political secrets like who killed her brother onto her before round 2 is a scene that should honestly be taught as a cautionary tale about how not to write.
Well, one thing we know, you're no fake. You're a genuine idiot.
Thank you.
A strong contrast to the Imperial siblings, Valia and Tula Harkonnen are the ones really carrying the show, besides Desmond. Both sisters are very different but interesting in their own right. Valia is sort of the main character in this show, but I actually found Tula's backstory more interesting. You have a grasp on Valia's character very early on. She's ambitious, cunning, and sometimes even vicious. Yeah, she later gains depth and we get a deeper understanding of her motivations, but Tula on the other hand had more surprises. Both sisters are driven by two things in their actions: the grief for their brother, Griffin, whose death they blame on House Atreides, and their desire to break out of the rut that House Harkonnen is in, after they had been exiled to the icy, barren planet of Lankavale. I found Tula's story of revenge fascinating. Her infiltrating an Atreides camp, seducing Ori Atreides, slaughtering everyone but carrying out a child who is revealed to be Desmond, was hands down the most gripping plotline in the entire show for me. I also enjoyed the two sisters' chemistry, but unfortunately we don't get a lot of that, as quite early on the two are separated, with Valia personally attempting to take down Desmond and get back into the Emperor's graces, and Tula remaining at the Sisterhood's headquarters on Wallach 9. This separation hurts Tula's character the most from a writing standpoint. The Sisterhood, who are supposed to be the main focus of the entire show, are unfortunately a very hit-or-miss bunch. I didn't find myself really caring about most of the acolytes, the students. The everyday slice-of-life type scenes felt forced, the friendships were too thinly presented to be convincing, and the representation of Bene Gesserit's skills or abilities is where we get most of the cheesy, straight-to-television visual effects, like the clunky zoom-in effects when practicing truth-saying.
Their ship collected it.
His story is true, Your Majesty.
Essentially learning to tell when someone is lying every time. Or the Gollum voice, or the agony. The agony is how Reverend Mothers unlock their genetic memory. They take a poison called the Water of Life, and after intense training, having the ability to be completely in control of their body, down to a cellular level, they transmutate the poison and convert it to a harmless substance in their body. This process unlocks their genetic memory of all their female ancestors. These memories are conscious, however, which is why the agony is so dangerous, even if the Reverend Mother survives. They could even take complete control over the original person, locking away their mind inside their own. This is what happens to Lila, whose ancestors include the founder of the Sisterhood, and Dorothea, her daughter, who eventually takes control of Lila's mind, making her what we call an abomination in Dune lore. The agony as shown in the series could not have been a more literal approach. I appreciated how it represented the overwhelming nature of having multiple personalities living inside the mind, but the scene once again felt a little too straight to TV and amateurish, out of place.
The key to the reckoning is one born twice. Once in blood, once in spice.
I couldn't help but think how ridiculous it would have been to feature the same style scene when Jessica or Paul go through the agony in Dune Part 2. I also found the relationship between Tula and Lila to be extremely unconvincing. That is simply because we never really see why and how they bonded. We are simply told over and over again how much Tula cares for her, which makes Lila's arc painfully predictable and obvious. Notice how I've been talking for a long time about the story, but there wasn't much to the actual plot. That's because it really is as simple as I initially said. The quite simplistic story of the sisters and Desmond struggling for power, while the Emperor tries to stay afloat, is stretched out a lot by the flashbacks and the less interesting side plots and characters. And the result is that after the convoluted exposition dump that was the first episode, we get a dragging story that's moving very slowly while it feels like it shouldn't be.
You pull something like that again and I'll stab you myself, you little shit.
The series culminates into an ending that is much stronger than the beginning, which is great because I think it's already confirmed that we are getting more seasons. The finale sets up a new power dynamic, which I'm actually interested to see where it goes. Being tired of getting pushed to the side, the Emperor's wife Natalia seduces Desmond and kills her husband and his lover. Desmond reunites with his mother Tula, but decides to arrest her. Valia and company go to Arrakis, after she successfully resists the burning virus planted by Desmond and ignited by fear. And finally, Dorothea, in Lila's body, destroys the AI database and reveals how Valia and the others killed the Butlerian sisters. This one was, as I said, quite predictable and poorly set up, with all the skeletons just laying around as evidence still, but whatever. At least the status quo for the new season is different. The story of Dune Prophecy is set thousands of years before the events of Dune and the birth of Paul Atreides, just 80 years after the end of the Butlerian Jihad, the great crusade against thinking machines, or AI, in the Dune universe. The Butlerian Jihad is one of the most important events in Dune lore, for a multitude of reasons. After the thinking machines were defeated, any AI technology was banned in the Empire. Defiance of this rule was met with the death penalty, which led to a large-scale reversal of technological advancement throughout humanity. That is why Dune feels futuristic but primitive at the same time. Frank Herbert wanted to create a stagnating world, which is lit up like a candle, with Paul's holy war, as complex non-thinking technology like intergalactic travel and ornithopters are contrasted by medieval-like warfare, very feudal hierarchy, and rigid traditions. However, the demand for calculations, the quality of life that computer technology could provide, and the need for humans to be able to perform such calculations, directly and indirectly led to the creations of things like the Mentat Order, basically human computers with unmatched logical and calculatory abilities, the Bene Gesserit, and the Spacing Guild as well. These groups would later be major players in the Empire's politics and economy. That should give you a pretty good idea why the Butlerian Jihad is important in the world of Dune. Which is why I was very curious to see a story shortly after such a crucial point of the timeline. To my disappointment, the thinking machine aspect of the show wasn't very interesting. In the first couple of episodes, it is explored on a very surface level that some houses feel the prohibition of AI tech is too harsh and continue to use some thinking machines. But the actual examples we see are mainly the young Richese boy's robot lizard, Tula's AI incubation tank, and the Sisterhood's concealed AI DNA database. The show doesn't really explore why some houses still cling on to this technology, what people are missing in life that was previously provided by AI, and the impact of losing that had on them, and the actual dangers of such technology, which in my opinion would have been a more interesting subject, especially since the machine wars and the purge of thinking technology is quite recent in the show. So my hopes for next season, besides a higher quality script, is really to use the same huge budget the series had, judging by the visuals, but spend some more time in the writer's room with some Dune experts, and narrow down the main story to something a bit more gripping, and less low-quality distractions or feeble attempts at Game of Thronesifying Dune. There is so much potential in this world, and to unlock it, all you have to do is stay true to Frank Herbert's vision. And to unlock your potential to have the best opinions about movies, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel, as I have a lot more planned for 2025. If you're still here, why not check out my first video from last year, which was a comparison of Dune Part 2 and the book. Anyway, a belated Happy New Year, and see you soon.
Precious.